good evening, and welcome to the second episode of Freedom Report UK. This evening I am joined by Adrian. Adrian, good evening.
Hi there, hey.
Thanks for joining me tonight. Now, many of you know a little bit about me. My name's Scott. I stood for the Libertarian Party before, but not many people know so much about you, Adrian. So could you give us a brief introduction, please?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Adrian Finn. I study a master's degree of architecture at the Arts University Bournemouth. I live in Bournemouth, and I became interested in libertarian issues ever since learning a little bit about some of the financial crises that Greece were going through, specifically at the time. My dad just spoke to me about the issues, and ever since then I've been interested. So yeah, that's about it.
Cool. Well, it's always nice to have people from different walks of life on board. So I've picked three articles to talk about today. Going to start with the normal opening set with BBC News, because obviously that's the most reliable and unbiased news reporting site that's out there. So the first article that we've got today is actually from BBC News. It is Coronavirus Scientists Question School Closures Impact. So this is essentially where a number of scientists have said that they're not really sure that the effect of closing schools, because children are much less likely to get symptoms or get ill from coronavirus. And it also looks at several other types of related viruses. And that basically, when you compare them against some of the influenza outbreaks, there's no real benefit from closing the schools, is essentially what they're saying. So they've looked at some of the SARS outbreaks as well as COVID-19. And they've said, the cost of school closures are very, very high, and there is potential damage to the children's education, their mental health and family life, and family finances are affected. So it's not a simple issue. So it's an interesting article, I think, because it does perhaps sort of back up some of because many of us have sort of said that some of the measures that have been taken, while we understand there is certainly a necessity to change daily life as a result of this outbreak, we think perhaps some of them have gone a little bit too far, and perhaps this is backing up our side to say that some of these measures that have been taken have actually gone too far. Adrian, do you have any thoughts on this one?
So I think in terms of the sort of scientific the basis on whether to close the schools or not. Ultimately, we're just trusting various scientific organisations and what evidence and they provide to the government. I mean, for instance, studying architecture at the university, I saw it was quite sad seeing so many courses being cut short, for instance, at universities, and lots of courses such as model making being unable to continue their work, and that's going to have a massive impact on their situation economically in terms of producing a portfolio. And I think, however, in terms of positives, we're starting to see that actually having to attend school, like in a mandatory way, actually having to go into school, is not necessarily the be-all and end-all of education. Of course, the mental health part and the socializing is a massive deal, but we might even start to see a cultural shift in terms of people learning remotely at home and having remote lessons and things like that. And that's sort of the side which I'm more interested in, what it actually means to have the schools closed down and how learning can actually shift from that side.
So that's interesting. I mean, I think in a minute I'm going to ask you to explain a little bit more about what's happened to you, because obviously you're in the education system, so you're living this. This is actually happening to you. I mean, I don't have any children, and I work full time, although I'm planning to go back to university very soon. I have no experience of what this has done and how it's been handled, how quick it was, how swift it was. So could you tell us a little bit about, what's actually happened at University of Bournemouth? How did this shutdown just happen? How did it pan out?
Yeah. So essentially, we all started to see the news build up just as anybody else did. And obviously, universities are institutions where you have people coming from all sorts of walks of life, but also all around the world. And so it even got to a point where the tutors were saying, no, we'd still like you to attend class, we'd still like you to come in. And then a few of us were thinking, like, should we take the risk? Should we actually come in or not? Like, considering that the coronavirus can last so long on surfaces, and there's hundreds of people going through the university. On the architecture side of things, essentially, we've all been working from home. So we've been using Microsoft Teams or Zoom, for instance, to keep in touch with our tutors. For me, I mean, what the reason I brought up the model makers earlier is because the devastation that's happened with them is that if you're working in the model making industry, having access to a workshop is just absolutely essential. Like some of these people are doing like a metal work and other really like complicated things that involve like all sorts of machines, and their education has just been cut to the point where basically they've been told, okay, we're either going to mark your work as it is now unfinished, and then we're going to give you grades based on what is unfinished, or if you can tell us that you do have access to the resources you need from home, then you can carry on with your course, and then you can hand in your work at the end of the course, as if you were just attending university anyway. So I think that's absolutely devastating for them. For some other courses where some people just work from home anyway and barely attend lectures, so they're not being affected. But at an arts university in particular, like the creative industry in the UK is quite an underrated thing. It's grown really well. It's very established, and so we're getting hit pretty hard. I love using like the model making facilities. I love using the workshop, but there's so many things which you can't access, and also one thing I just remembered is because I like to do a lot of 3D printing. I was hoping to be able to bring a 3D printer into the house while I was sort of in essentially lockdown before the schools actually closed. But I was told by the sort of technician that I wasn't allowed to take it home because of health and safety reasons, which I don't understand at all. Just because a 3D printer is not complicated, it plugs into a mains just fine, and you just leave it printing. You can even leave them printing overnight. There's no issue. Just leave it in a room and let it print. And so what's quite sad about that is that the universities, from what I can see, they haven't thought, okay, how can we get some of our resources into people's hands in like a first come first serve, since we're going to be locked down probably until the summer. Instead, there's loads of these printers which are either thankfully being used for the efforts to help with the NHS to print off face masks and things, or they're just being sat gathering dust and students are suffering for it because I've still got to hand in work.
Yeah, it's a real shame. I mean, it is an interesting point that you've made there because, as I said earlier, I'm looking to go back to university. I'm doing some preparatory work at the moment, but I'm a computer programmer and I'm looking to learn more about artificial intelligence. And I'm completing a course which I think is delivered by the University of San Francisco, but it's all online. So for me, I can continue my study by literally not getting up because I now work from home. And I can just literally finish working and then just start my study, and I don't even have to get up. And it is as simple as that. But obviously, yeah, for people that need a workshop, I mean, if you think about like some of the equipment you'd find at lathes, all the saws, the milling equipment, etc., that's all pretty precision stuff, and a lot of it, as far as I know, is not very cheap. So to suggest that you could just have some of that kicking around your bedroom or whatever, that's really tough, isn't it? So, So do you think perhaps a more balanced approach might have been that the universities were locked down, but for people that didn't really need to attend, like what I would have been doing, essentially I would have been told to go and work from home, to learn from home, but would it have been perhaps more reasonable to say all the people that are involved with, the physical machinery, the engineering departments, the arts, the crafts, etc., where you physically need resources that the university has, perhaps those students should have been allowed to continue in?
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it is, I mean, I wouldn't know how to sort of give it a formal name or something, but some kind of like evacuation strategy of resources coming out of the university for one would have been great, because there's all sorts of things, as I say, like the 3D printers and even things that you could use as like a studio or cameras or sort of video recorders could have all been organized so that students either had a first come first serve basis or had the resources shared out that they could take home, as opposed to it being left to gather dust for the rest of the year. And then, of course, what you're saying more specifically, unfortunately, if we don't understand exactly how the coronavirus spreads or anything like that, it's maybe hard to say how people can safely enter a workshop or enter a studio. But I would assume if you follow some basic common sense about germ spreading and wear gloves, wear a cotton mask, but you can still work in these areas of the workshop, I think that would be absolutely fine, as long as, let's say, a cotton mask and rubber gloves didn't cause you potential harm if you're using a like a bandsaw, for instance.
Yeah, because if you get
But
someone
it's yeah,
caught,
exactly, like a tie or such. So ultimately, it just if there was some, I mean, I know it's an overused term, but nuanced thinking about how the university could actually stay operational, and this is what my housemate thinks as well, we could still be producing some really incredible work, whereas our tutors are saying, oh, if you have to use like a cereal box and glue and stickers to make your architectural design, then so be it. And we're
so
just sitting here thinking, okay, what do we do with that?
so you're on Blue Peter now, are you? Excellent.
Basically, yeah, get my badge.
So one final thought on this. So where do you think the problem lies for sort of the lack of planning around such a thing? I mean, there's been pandemics in the past, Spanish flu. This isn't something that has just happened and is completely unprecedented, although it's very rare and very unusual. And thankfully, this is the only one I've ever seen in my lifetime. Hopefully, the only one I will ever see in my lifetime.
Mm.
But do you think that there's an expectation that government will just sort things like this out and they won't be a problem, so we don't need to worry about such things? We don't need to plan for such things, or do you think the universities and the schools bear some sort of responsibility for this as well?
Well, I think what we're going to see from now on, and as you say about how unprecedented this is, I mean, if you hear the sort of that general hearsay that a mass pandemic like this hits once every 100 years, and I think what's truly unique is a mass pandemic like this is hitting at a point where we're so sort of economically and advanced in so many ways. I think it's hard that you can't hold the government to account for, let's say, every injury or every death. That would be absolutely preposterous. But I think in the future now, universities and councils and governments, they will have to start planning their sort of doomsday scenarios. That they're going to have to start thinking. As we've said, the contrast between the model makers and, let's say, the computer programmers. If there is a case where like a mass pandemic hits or some other similar situation, how are we going to be able to keep these students working to the utmost of their abilities? I don't think it's been addressed very well, simply because it's so unprecedented, as you say. But perhaps we'll see more constructive reactions to pandemics in the future. That's all we can say for now, I think.
Sounds like a good note to finish on. So I'm going to move on to our next news story now. Now, this is one which has tickled a lot of people. It's from the Metro. Police threaten to search shopping trolleys to check you're only buying essentials. Now, surprisingly, there's only 138 comments on this, and there's some pictures of what looks like a security official looking through someone's bag. It's just a white bag, and then there's various people holding chairs and things like that. Now, I think there's 2 points here. First off, it's very interesting the way the media sort of portray some of these things. So we've got, as I say, this picture of a security official looking through someone's bag, and it says underneath the caption, "Police forces are days away from introducing new measures, including searching shopping to ensure that it's essential." And then they admit that it's a stock image, but if you look very carefully, the police official doesn't say police in English. If you look at it, you can identify that this is actually the Irish word for police.
Yes.
And it's an issue. But basically, this is a photo taken from Dublin, I believe, where it is actually common practice during the Troubles to search shopping for bombs and other such things from IRA terrorists. So it's the media has put a lot more spin on this than is perhaps actually there, because then it goes down a bit further past the headline. Chief Constable Nick Aldery of Nottinghamshire Police said his force is only a few days away from introducing extreme measures. Well, that's one police force out of 43 in England and Wales, and then there's Police Scotland and the Police Service of Northern Ireland. So it's not, the media is bigging this up to be something that I think it isn't. But the other interesting side is there's a few specific police forces that are very, very quick, and a few people in them that have been very quick to embrace the most draconian of measures and just lose all sort of context around everything. I mean, an essential shop is is very it's very subjective, isn't it?
Hmm.
So I could say, I'm this is the example I've used a lot. I need to go to B&Q. Well, is that an essential shop? Well, my toilet's not working anymore because I've got a plumbing problem. I would say
Hmm.
that's pretty essential. Um, and then you've got the other side of it. Oh, I'm going to work. I work in the NHS. Okay, that sounds pretty essential. What do you do? Oh,
Hmm.
I service one of the coffee machines. That sounds a little bit less
Hmm.
essential now. So, what do you think on this news story?
Yeah, well, I mean, Scott, one of my favorite pastimes, I think, is picking up a news article, getting angry at the headline, and then reading a few paragraphs in and realizing that I can actually keep calm because it's not as bad as I think it is. I mean, you can see in that paragraph that you quoted about Nick Adderley, is where it says his force is only a few days away from introducing extreme measures, and that they only quote the bit where it says a few days away. Now, from what I can tell, basically this constable, all he did was make threats on the behalf of the Northamptonshire police, saying, from what we've found, people haven't been sticking to the rules and good practice of preventing the spread. So we may have to bring in more like stopping people in their cars and making sure they're making essential journeys. But again, it's just the media taking a silly spin on it because they've only quoted a few days away. And then, as we know, there was a BBC article which confirms that the police officer a couple of days later actually regretted saying what he did, and he said it was quite clumsy to say that. And then on your second point, in terms of the kind of draconian measures, I just think the fact that they're trying to police essential travel is just a proof of when you grow like a police state to be so massive, it starts to try to take on problems which are completely ambiguous and are basically unenforceable because anybody can say anything to you. Like is this an essential purchase or not? It's so subjective and ambiguous. Um, so I think what they should be doing, if they were going to be working sensibly and trying to stop the spread, I don't think it should be about enforcing quote unquote essential travel. It should just be about saying, look, before you go into the shop, are you wearing your cotton mask? Are you wearing rubber gloves? Or are you wearing, gloves and things like that? It should, you should, so for instance, I go outside running like every day for about half an hour to an hour. I leave the front door. I don't touch anything else. Like I don't touch fence posts. I don't touch like gates. I go for a run within my own means, and I come back home. I leave the house every day, but I really can't see how that is spreading the virus. Let's say I had it, I don't go near anybody. So I just try to adopt a common sense view of this. And when you see these sort of draconian measures the police start to quote, it's because there's this breakdown of communication, and it's going to ultimately lead to people not trusting the police, and then we're going to see the what was it, the sort of lockdown anxiety. There was a term for it where people start to purposefully break the curfew because they have no patience for it, and they have no patience for the police enforcing the rules.
Yeah, I think that's a real risk. At some point, people are not going to tolerate being shut in their houses for much longer. So yeah, the whole model of policing from when it was originally conceived was policing by consent, in
Mm,
that the police officer was just another member of the public. That was just paid to be there and to enforce the law and to do what a normal member of the public would do if they had the time to do it. So yeah, I think that it's really important to protect that policing by consent, make sure that the public does support the police and that they are being sensible with the measures.
yeah. And I think that's good why that follow up BBC article, the coronavirus public reassured over lockdown policing rules,
Yeah, I'll
kind
just
of comes on to that, doesn't
I'll
it?
just put that on the screen so now everyone can see it. So yeah, Downing Street says people can buy whatever they want from shops that remain open amid concern some police are overstepping lockdown powers. It's interesting that they're sort of just saying that they're overstepping. There's no statement that they're going to invoke anything to stop police doing this, or that the Independent Police Complaints Commission is going to get involved.
Mm.
Um, but then maybe that's something that needs to be taken away and dealt with afterwards now. But I think it is positive that the government is seeing that the police are perhaps saying things they shouldn't be saying and
Yes.
interjecting and saying, no, this isn't right, we can't do this,
Mm.
you are going a bit too far here. Because at the moment we don't really know how long this lockdown's going to be, do we?
Oh no. I mean, it could be extended. They seem to extend like once every 3 weeks, and they can decide how long they're going to extend it. And that's why the relationship with the public is so important. I mean, when you look at various countries in Europe in terms of how the state has responded to the coronavirus pandemic, I sort of see a like a spectrum where you've got, for instance, France kind of taking no nonsense and shutting down almost everything straight away, and then you've got Sweden, which is obviously very laissez-faire about a lot of this, just with some shutdown. But I think what me and my housemate spotted in particular is that what Boris and the British government has done has been more like a back and forth, like a bargaining with the public. It started off quite laissez-faire, and then they said, but if we start to see evidence that the deaths and the cases start to rise, and we don't flatten the curve, and people don't adopt common sense measures such as not gathering and things like that, we will bring in, more laws, and we will give the police more powers. And it seems to be more like a conversation between the police force and the citizenry, if you understand what I mean there. So gradually reducing the liberties that we have based on what the government claims to see.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I think their approach probably makes the most sense. Really, the only thing I do get concerned about is the duration of the lockdown. When we see the economic damage that's going to be done, I'm a little bit concerned that going forward, where is the money going to come from to pay for the healthcare or
Mm.
unemployment benefits or whatever? Because at some point the money will run out. And if this, I think I looked it up the other day, and if this, the lockdown carries on for 2 months, it will be the overall economic impact will be worse than the 2008 financial crisis. And
Oh
if it goes
wow.
on for 3 months, it will be the worst recession the UK has ever gone through.
Oh, wow.
So
Unbelievable.
yeah, it is an interesting one. So the last article I want to talk about is it's a bit of an oddball. It's not a news article, although it has been featured in the news. So to give everyone a bit of background on this, this has been in the news. A coronavirus compensation assessing China's potential culpability and avenues of legal response. Now this was a research paper published by the Henry Jackson Society. Now the Henry Jackson Society is a political think tank based in London, I believe, and
Mm.
they're named after Henry Jackson. I can't remember who he is, but he's something to do with civil liberties, as far as I remember. Um, I'm not overly familiar with their work, if I'm honest.
Mm.
But this article has been written by Matthew Henderson, Dr. Alan Mendoza, Dr. Andrew Foxall, James Rogers, and Sam Armstrong. And it is quite lengthy. And they talk about a number of sort of international treaties, international law, about how the damages could be levied against China for allowing
Mm.
this disease to be unleashed on the world, as it were.
Yeah.
And yeah, the thing I'm scrolling through is just the extract. You have to download the report. I think there's a link down the bottom.
Mm.
But they quote things like the international health regulations, and they say that the international health regulations require that states monitor and share all information regarding clinical descriptions, laboratory results, sources and types of risks, numbers of human cases and deaths, conditions affecting the spread of disease, and the health measures employed with respect to a potential outbreak. So, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, do you think it's practical to try and sue China?
Well, yeah, this is it. In terms of sort of international law and things that can get as nebulous as this, it's not my subject area, even though I am interested in sort of geopolitical matters. For me, what I was so interested about with this was just because I have been to China twice, like I've been to Hong Kong and China, and I have seen some of the sort of life on the ground there. And in terms of these like wet markets and things, I can probably talk more about the sort of the cultural side of this, and maybe the relation to the state as opposed to like the methods
Okay.
the Henry Jackson Society is talking about of actually suing China. Which, by the way, I don't really understand how China can be held to account at this rate because it's such an economic powerhouse that supplies the world. I don't understand how they're going to be able to actually levy anything against China,
Yeah, it's the
considering
modern
it's
day
yeah.
workshop of the world, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, like, and the amount, like the way it's expanding militarily, I don't understand how else they can really hold them to account, and how, and of course it's all a fight of misinformation. I mean, so for instance, there's two YouTube channels that I'd just like to plug here, which I'd highly recommend people watch. One of them is ADV China, and one of them is China Uncensored. And ADV China is just a couple of guys who live in China that like Western origin, and they they talk about the issues on the ground from what it's been like living there for a couple of decades. And China Uncensored is more like a news format YouTube channel which actually talks about all of the issues as they happen in China. So they have like the bulk of the information on this. But in terms of going back to what I saw on the ground there, I think one thing that the Henry Jackson Society say is that this report apportions no blame for the people of China for what happened. They are innocent victims like the rest of us. This is the fault of the CCP. Certainly, the CCP has like massive issues that need to be pointed out here, especially letting people leave Humen for like, I think it's like almost 1 million people or something left Humen without sort of being put into quarantine, which is how it managed to spread so quickly. They were so slow to react. But what I've actually seen on the ground is I've actually sort of been to one of these markets, and the way that like culturally they sort of prepare like meat and things to sell, their standards of hygiene are really quite far behind us. The way that they keep animals and things like that. I think in some cases Chinese citizens, I think if they are hit as hard as we're seeing, they will have to take quite a strong cultural shift to not deal in the kinds of animals that they do in the wet markets, especially like bats and pangolins, which are known to carry such diseases. But in terms of where this culture came about, I was actually watching a Vox article about this, and essentially, I believe it was during the late 60s or 70s, while the Communist Party was sort of planning how all the agriculture across China was going to work. Essentially, because their central planning failed so strongly, people started to turn back to the sort of hunter-gatherer attitude of sort of tribes before like civilizations got into agriculture so well. And these some people, just to survive because they couldn't actually rear from the land, they started to hunt like wild animals in order to put food on the tables for their families. And then this became so successful that the Communist Party actually allowed like these people to trade the wild animal meat which they hunted, and then that created what we know now as the wet market. Uh, and then that was allowed to develop, and then it became such an industry that even if they wanted to stop it, there was so much money behind the industry that the government wasn't really able to clamp it down, probably because of some sort of lobbying measures from those wet markets. But this does actually go back to a policy of the Chinese Communist Party, and it is that sort of great leap forward, that trying to centrally plan agriculture that went so badly that people turned back to a sort of like hunting wild animal way of sourcing food, and which is not, which is obviously it's led to today. So that's what I find the most interesting in this case from China.
Yeah, that is quite interesting, because one of the questions I was going to sort of pose on this was if if the people involved in these wet markets don't have any money at all, they are in poverty, they're desolate. Um, is it not perfectly reasonable that they would just buy and eat whatever they can get their hands on, because they don't actually know when their next meal's coming from? So, if given the choice of starvation or eating, a hedgehog in the UK or whatever, I would take eating the hedgehog rather than
Well, yeah.
starving to death.
Well, this is how it started, and it's a little bit like when they say that in this report that the people of China are innocent victims. I mean, when you I mean, they had like an attempt at like a democratic revolt, and it was clamped out by the Communist Party. And then after that, the Communist Party mismanaged agriculture so badly that, yeah, as you say, like people had no choice but to find their next meal in such a way. As far as today, I can't really comment on that because I do believe they could probably get a hold of their meat products from other places. But I did see like the standards of hygiene over there in some of these places. is just not to our standards. And I mean, these epidemics do come out of China, so we'll just have to see how the Communist Party reacts, if it actually clamps down on the wet markets or not.
I guess time will tell. It actually sort of opens up a whole other can of worms about the evolution of technology and the economy versus the evolution of culture, because they're obviously intertwined to a degree, but I've long since thought that the evolution of our culture takes a lot longer than the evolution of technology and the economy. But that really is a subject for another day, and I think now we're just about out of time, so we've been recording for about half an hour now. So Adrian, thank you very much for joining me this evening. Fantastic set of comments there, and I hope our viewers find it interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. It's been great to talk.
Excellent. Well, it's been a pleasure. So we'll publish this video a little later, and we'll put all of the links up. Adrian, if you could send me the links to those YouTube channels that you mentioned, I would like to share them with this video, if that's okay.
Great.
And hopefully we'll be doing our third episode around this time next week. So thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll wish you a good evening. Thank you.
See you guys.